Alright, today we're going to talk about using a variety of techniques to factor polynomials, and this is a really important lesson because factoring is probably the most important concept that you have down before you move on to the next course. So let's go ahead and start with just some basic factoring of pulling out the greatest common factors. What's the biggest number and variable? It could be just a number that could be pulled out, or it could be a variable, or both. So the biggest thing that could be divided out of each of these. So 5 and 15, they both have a 5 that I could divide out of each of those. An x squared and an x, well, they both have at least one x that I could divide out. So I'm going to put the 5x out front. That's my greatest common factor, the greatest factor that they have in common that I could divide out of each of them. So then I'm going to go ahead and divide that out. So when I take 5 and divide it by 5, there's no number left, kind of like pulling it out. And then x squared, take out an x, I just have an x left. And we can go ahead and check our answer if we were to kind of FOIL this. If I were to take 5x times x, do I get 5x squared? Yeah, so I know I did it right. Next, I'm going to take the 15x and divide it by 5x. So let's just start with the numbers. 15 divided by 5 is 3, and x divided by x is 1. So I don't really need to represent that number there, cancels it out. So now if I were to redistribute, yep, I would get 15x when I take 5x times 3. So on the next one, look to see the 9 and the 6. What do those have in common? Common factor, meaning a number I could divide out of each of those that's the same. Well, not 1, 2, 3. 3 is a factor of 9 and 3 is a factor of 6, and it's the biggest factor they have in common. Then I look at the variables c and c. Well, there's just one in each of them, and it has to be in each term for it to be able to come out front here. So again, I'm going to have those parentheses, and my number out front is the greatest common factor. D squared and d to the third, or d cubed, I can pull 2 out because there's 2 here and 3 here. So the biggest number that they both have in common, 2. Now I'm going to go ahead and divide that out. 9 divided by 3 is 3. C, take out a c, no c's left. D squared, take out d squared, no d's left. Bring down the subtraction. 6 divided by 3 is 2. C, divide out a c, nothing. D cubed, take out d squared, just 1d left. And you're done. And again, refoil if you need to check. So kind of redistribute there. I guess it wouldn't be FOIL, it'd be distribute. All right, let's go ahead and have you try these next 3 examples. So pause your video, and then when you're ready, check your answers and hit play. Pen's freaking out. So 9y is your greatest common factor. That would leave you with 3x squared, no y, plus y squared in the parentheses. On the next one, we look at each term, and it has to be able to pull out of each term. So this does not have any variables, so I cannot pull any variables out, only a number. What does 6, 9, and 3 all have a common factor of? Well, 3. So I have x squared, y, plus, I'm dividing over here, c. 14 and 2 has a factor of 2. And they have a x and a y in common. So 7y plus, now if I'm pulling the exact same thing out, 2x, don't leave that blank, but the same thing divided by the same thing is 1. It's like a fraction of 3 over 3. Well, that reduces to 1. So even with variables, the same thing divided by the same thing, we still have to hold that place value and put a 1. All right, moving on to factoring when the first term, we always represent that as a. The coefficient in front of the x squared is a, coefficient in front of the x is b, and then the last sort of constant there is c. So in front here, is a 1. So that's why when we say when a is 1, it's like there's an invisible 1 right there. So we're going to come up, this is pretty easy to factor, so there's a trick to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at, make sure it's in standard form in order, so x squared, then x, then no x. And we're going to multiply, figure out the factors that multiply to get c, but add to get b. Okay, so what are the factors that multiply to get 12, but add to get negative 8? So we're going to put those factors in a set of parentheses. So I know I'm going to have an x and an x. Why are the x's in front? Because how are we going to get x squared if we were to FOIL this? X times x to get the x squared. And then our other two numbers are just the numbers that multiply to get 12 but add to get 8. So 6 times 2 gives me 12. And in order for it to add up to negative 8, they would both have to be negative. So that's it. That's our answer. Let's do one more together and then I'll have you try on your own. So factors of 7, our last term, that add to get 8. So I'm going to put an x at the beginning of my parentheses in each set, 2 sets. And then factors of 7, well, there's only 7 and 1, and they do add to get 8, and they're both positive. Make sure to watch those signs. All right, go ahead and try those next 3 on your own. Again, multiplies to get that last term, adds to get the middle. And you can just set up your parentheses and then fill in those 2 numbers that fit to add to get your middle. So pause now and try those 3 and then check. All right, so for our answers here, we should have positive 9 and negative 4. For letter C, we should have x and x, 8 and 2. And for D, we should have, let's see, 6, positive 6, and negative 4. Make sure your 6 is positive and your 4 is negative so that they add to get positive 2. All right, let's move on to when A is not 1. Now this would probably be the more difficult process and the concept that I notice that students struggle the most with. So you're going to definitely need to be practicing this method because there are quite a few steps. So I'm going to walk you step by step. We're going to first just identify the A, the B, and the C. So we're going to multiply our A times our C, which would be 20 times negative 3. So we're going to find the factors of, when you multiply those you get negative 60. So what are the factors of negative 60 that add, negative 60, that add up to get your B? Well, your B is negative 11. So let's think about what times what gives me 60, negative 60 that would add to get negative 11. So negative 11, using the newfound factors 4 and negative 15. If I were to multiply those, I would get negative 60. If I were to add those, I'd get negative 11. So those are my 2 numbers, kind of like what we did on the previous factoring questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace or split the middle term. So instead of it being negative 11, we're going to go ahead and write it as 4x and negative 15x, because that's the same thing. If I were to add those together, I would have negative 11x. So I'm going to bring down, keep my first term and keep my last term the same as they were above. So the first term was 20y squared. Then I'm going to bring down that negative 15y. Is it a y or an x? I think it was an x. Nope, it's a y. Plus 4y. And then keep that last term the same, that 3. Okay, so the only thing that changed from above is this right here. It used to be negative 11y, and we just changed it to be two terms that still add up to that same term. Right, now what we're going to do is we're going to group. So what we do is we group the first two terms, and we group the last two terms, and then we figure out what the greatest common factor is. So going back to our first example, what can I pull out of just these two terms here, 20y squared and negative 15y? And I can pull out a 5y. And so I pull out or divide out that 5y from each term. So 4y minus 3. And then I notice that this is 4y minus 3, and there's nothing I can pull out of that. So I just hold the place value again. I hold place values with a 1. And then I have 4y minus 3. Oh, and my hubby's calling me. Hold on one second. I'm going to hit the reject button. Sorry, love. All right, so we have our greatest common factors that we're going to put together, 5y and 1. So that's just those front terms. They come together. And then notice that these two things are the same. Oops. So that and that are the exact same. So that's just my second part of my answer. 4y minus 3. And there's my final answer. Put a box around it. All right, we'll do one more together, and then we'll have you try. And I'm not going to have all these kind of steps in this example. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our first term times our last term, negative 10, and we're coming up with the factors of negative 10 that add to get 3. So it's got to be 5 and 2, but the 2 being negative. Again, I'm going to replace the middle term with these two factors that essentially add to get that same thing. So bring down the first term, bring down the last term, and we're going to split the middle. And it doesn't matter what order you put your factors in. If you put the 5 first or the negative 2 first, it's not going to matter. It'll still get you the same answer. Then we group, and let's divide out that greatest common factor. So what can I pull out of both of those? Well, not anything out of 2 and 5, but an x. Oops, so I got to leave that 2, and then a 5. So I'm just dividing out that x. Here I can pull out a negative 1, and how do I know what to pull out? Well, again, you want to make sure that your parentheses are going to match when you divide that out. Whatever you divide out, your parentheses should match. So if I pull out a negative 1, I'm going to have a positive 2x, and it's going to change to a plus 5. And yep, oops, my smart board is very sensitive at the moment. There we go. They match. 2x plus 5, 2x plus 5. So we're going to put our greatest common factors together. So the x minus 1 and then the 2x plus 5, what they have in common is the second part of your answer. There we are. All right, go ahead and try this next one on your own. Remember, start with first term times last term. And I know that's the hardest part sometimes, is just to come up with those factors of negative 45. So if you want to pause and then try to come up with those factors, if you get stuck, go ahead and hit play and you can see what those factors are, and then hit pause again. Try and do at least a couple of those steps on your own. Okay, so hit pause and try. Factors of negative 45 that would give you 4 are 9 and negative 5. So we bring down the first term. We replace the middle with those two factors. Make sure to give them a variable, an x, because we're just splitting that 4x up into two equivalent parts there. And then bring down that last term. Now our next step is to group.